All right. Hi, everybody. Episode 21, because it's the 21st. And, yesterday, if you saw my Instagram story, I kind of had a big failure. I did not put one out in the 24-hour time frame of the 20th. So we got 2 episodes coming to you today, which is fine. Yeah, it was a big upset.
Making it up, though.
Making it up as best as I can. Yeah, you got to keep on keeping on.
All that matters.
Yeah. I actually had to share one thing before and this is Cassie. She's on the podcast today. Your last name's Young?
Yes. Hi, everybody.
Hi. She is a news anchor.
Pretty much.
I'd say so. At this point.
We'll explain the nuances of that.
We'll explain. But I fucked up, and I learned something a long time ago in piano lessons. I took 5 of them total, but still bought a piano. You know what I mean? To really kind of. But I was like 18 too. It was weird. But he said, if you mess up, just keep going. Don't try to go back and play the note. Don't fumble. Just keep going. Right. So yesterday I messed up. So today I'm just gonna keep going. There you go. Because you got to keep on keeping on. You know what I'm saying? You can't quit.
I would have just done my regular episode the next day, but you're doubling up. You're more than keeping on.
I'm trying. Yeah, exactly. I was so upset. It was like I missed the mark by 7 minutes.
Damn.
YouTube was just moving a little slow, and I didn't
upload. I mean, I live a little bit near campus, so internet is a bitch sometimes.
Almost, yeah, all the time. Yeah. I don't know why, but you'd think by now it's like it'd be second nature all over the world.
No, well, the U.S. has some of the worst rates of internet speeds and the highest costs of all of the world. Most of the world has of the developed world has pretty fast internet speeds and pretty low cost for them.
That's very U.S. of us.
Yes,
it's very American. That's very American. That is the American form of Wi-Fi.
Right.
So now that my apologies out of the way, because I am upset.
But hey, it's U.S. It's U.S. Wi-Fi costs.
Right. We'll
not you.
We'll blame America instead of me. I wish Thanks Obama was still a thing in this case. But let's introduce you, Cassie Young.
Yes.
Keep almost calling you Cassie.
It's cool. Casey. It happens all the time.
I'm sure.
Similar names.
Spells similarly too.
Yeah.
You were the founder.
Yeah.
Of Matter
co-founder.
News. Co-founder of Matter News.
Yes.
Who's the other founder?
So I'll just tell a quick little bit of my origin story to explain that. When January of last year of 2018 hit, I had this idea for a while, and I just decided I'm going to go for it. I have no journalism background, not sure how I'm going to make it happen, but I'm going to work toward founding a local news outlet. And so I decided I'd make a documentary about the development of the city, and a few years down the road, I'll figure out how to do that. But 3 months in, Alexia Winfield, one of your guests from, I think, last week, she's a friend of mine, and she introduced me to local filmmakers, Loose Films. Have you ever heard of them?
Yeah, I've actually been to their, they're cool.
Yeah, they're amazing. I love them.
Yeah, Drew's a nice dude.
Oh my God, yeah. They really all are. And they invited me on a documentary style shoot where I held a boom pole, as we were talking about before we started recording. And it was to get some experience. And there was a local journalist who was delivering the interview that was part of the documentary. And I just started telling her about my idea, and she kind of seemed on my wavelength. And I texted Alexia after the shoot, and I said, something tells me in my intuition that I just met my co-founder. And so when we met up, it was a while later. She had been traveling, so she didn't get back to me super quick. Our ideas just really exploded. And she was everything I needed because she's an actual journalist, whereas I'm not. And so we really balance each other out. Well, I work for the government, so I have a pretty well-rounded idea of policies. I have a social work background, so...
what is your major? What was your major in college?
So in college, undergrad, I had political science and Latin American studies. I worked for a DC lobbying firm for a year before moving back to Ohio. I realized I actually really wanted to be in Columbus, which is where I'm from. And I work for a government agency running research trials to improve government programs so that they're better for citizens. And
cool.
yeah,
I can rock with that.
That's
nice.
So I'm still doing that, but I started to realize that I don't think we're going to achieve widespread deep change that we need as a society until we get back to kind of the basics of how we understand our own communities, what's going on in them, the government systems that are above them. And so that's why I decided I just really wanted to transition. I have people telling me that they get more information about local news from my social media accounts than from the local news.
Yeah, me included. That's how I DM'd you. I said, whoa, what do you do? This is crazy. I had no idea.
For sure.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
It really is. And I think especially at the local level, at the national level, you do have some outlets that are dedicated to covering and doing investigative work on national issues and in certain places, local things. But the local news, I think, is really lacking in terms of breadth and depth. I don't think that there's a lot available in the form of like video, animations, things that are really creative, and even local art that speaks to the subjects that the news is talking about. I think would be part of a well-rounded media and a local news media. So that's sort of what I wanted to build. And Jalen Grisso, the independent journalist, who's my co-founder, she is young. I'm 29. She's 24, but she actually has like 8 years in journalism. She went to OU Scripps School, and she has worked
She has 8 years in journalism?
Yeah, even
so
though
she started when she was like 16?
Yeah, so she's
badass.
Yeah. So she's been like, she knew she wanted to be a journalist from when she was little. And the funny thing is, I kind of thought I did when I was little, but I used to watch the local news, and I just like knew what I saw happening on the local news wasn't really my speed.
Right.
And so it's just funny that later in life I came to the conclusion that I wanted to get into journalism, but
do it your own way and kind of solve a problem.
Yeah, and do it with depth. And so like what's interesting about our model is Jalen is the one who knows all about journalism standards. She knows how to edit a piece for AP style and all those kind of things, whereas I'm really lacking that knowledge. And she also knows so much about stylistically and artistically, what format is going to tell a story best. What can we do with animation? What can we do with video? And she's got just like great instincts and a lot of experience in that area. She's worked for outlets in Honolulu, National, Mother Jones. So she has some really great experience in the journalism world, but I have a bit of a context of policy and social work and government systems and
you also have the drive
systems.
to want to tell the story.
Yes.
Which is something I said to you before we kind of started, was that I know people who want to own restaurants. I know people who want to be artists, do rap, music, whatever it is. Like, and entrepreneurs. Like, I see all that, but I've never seen somebody young like us, other than I guess like Vice people. But I've never met any of them. So you're the first person I met who's like I want to tell the news. Like, I want to tell the story.
Yeah.
So that's pretty amazing.
Absolutely.
I think that's neat.
Yeah, and that's exactly I feel like there's just so many stories going untold. And I was really involved in community organizing in grad school and even afterward, but I've sort of taken a bit of a shift, and not that my heart isn't in that type of work, but I feel that I can better serve the really inspiring campaigns, both for politics and things like that, but also that I see my friends like entrepreneurs inspiring. I think that all of that needs to be covered, and there's such a lack of awareness in Columbus. There's so many people here hungry to see things like what are happening here, but they're not seeing those things like up close and personal because they're not advertised among the traditional channels quite as well.
Yeah, Columbus Underground does like a terrible job sometimes of like really highlighting. I don't know who. Because sometimes you think like, okay, the press is I'm doing something cool, maybe the press will find me. But I recently found out that like you just call them and they'll come and talk to you.
Right.
So whoever wants that press is just calling those people to get the press. And since they're kind of an editorial there's a lot going on in Columbus, but I'm sure to have as much depth as they try to do cover,
right,
they shoot more of like a widespread than just like an actual kind of deep dive. They're probably just chomping at the bit to get whoever wants to talk about their new coffee shop or talk about their new brunch.
Right.
Or talk about whatever.
So this conversation actually really leads into, we're working on a video right now because we, to this point, have been trying to get content out there. We had a launch party. We've just really been assembling our team. We have a ton of people. So we are, as Matter News, like broke at this point, not for long. And it's been pretty much my co-founder and I just pulling together resources. And I mean, we have a great team of volunteers, people working with us, and that's our biggest strength, because I knew people would be hungry for the type of content we're making and going to continue to make. But what I didn't anticipate is how many people are hungry to make the type of content that we're making. There's a lot of people in this city that are filmmakers or also journalists, photographers. We even have someone that does data visualization. So there's people really from all different fields that want to contribute to helping the public better understand various facets of society and the possibilities that we can achieve if we just all kind of have a better understanding and connection to one another and what's going on around us. So one of the issues, which I think is an issue for Columbus Underground, even the Columbus Dispatch, and all the types of entities in between, is journalism isn't well funded. And so a lot of times the incentives in place just aren't there for local journalists. They don't have money to go out and do investigative work. Also, they're not always grounded in the community. And that's something that Matter News, a way we're different is that we are based in Columbus, where a lot of these outlets, not Columbus Underground is not an example of this, but Columbus Dispatch, for example, is not Columbus owned. It's not even Ohio owned. They're owned by Gay House Media out of New York. And so that's the case for our TV stations. All of our local news, quote unquote, is controlled by companies elsewhere.
That's why they all say Fox local.
Right.
They're all controlled by.
They're affiliates.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's been an increase in just common kind of scripts being used in the local news from the national affiliates rather than truly localized news.
Common stories to run that run through
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Which is crazy. And I don't think a lot of people, and you kind of breeze past it a little bit just because you're on a roll, and you're killing it, by the way.
Sure,
but
thanks.
a lot of the news outlets that are from wherever you're supposed to be from are not from there. They're owned by somebody else.
Right.
They're owned by some crazy guy. John Oliver actually did a little 15-minute piece on it.
It was really good.
It was really good.
Yeah.
But it was startling.
Absolutely.
To think that, I'm getting my news from a guy who's in New York, or I think the one that was really scary was the guy from Kentucky who kind of just plugs in what he wants to hear sometimes.
Right.
To run across 5 states.
Right.
It's fucking believable.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary.
The consolidation of the media is extreme. It's kind of like the banks. A lot of institutions in the U.S., the media has gone in the same way, where you could see that back in the day there was a lot of diversity in ownership of the media, but today nationally, 6 corporations own 90% of media outlets, and that really translates to local too, because you think of outlets such as Columbus Alive and Columbus Dispatch as different entities, but they're all owned by the same entity. So there's a lot less diversity in voice even amongst the different publications you see. And community publications have extremely downsized. There's so many less community papers than there used to be. And so you just don't have a lot of funding. And then a lot of the organizations who do have funding are basing their funding on advertising dollars. So that's something that Matter News is conscious of. And so we're set up as a nonprofit. We have a fiscal sponsor. We're not our full nonprofit yet.
Oh, yeah.
We have a fiscal sponsor called the Institute for Nonprofit News. It's a organization that acts as a professional organization for journalism outlets to share best practices, training, all kinds of good stuff. But they also serve as a fiscal sponsor for organizations that aren't quite set up as their own nonprofit yet.
Not yet.
Correct, but we will.
And
so we are not basing our model on advertising dollars, and also our content will always be free. So rather than
that way nobody can own you and tell you what to do.
Right, exactly. So it's the donors will sustain us, and then grants, especially in the beginning, are going to be sustaining our profits. And so and we're not going to be profiting the way a for-profit corporation would, but those profits will go into just making the news even better, putting more money into investigations, whereas other outlets right now are cutting money for investigations.
On a logistic question. What does it cost to run like an investigation?
That is a really difficult answer to say because it's just like anything. It depends what's involved in the investigation. So,
but is the cost comes from having everybody around to investigate?
Correct.
It's man hours.
Yeah, for the most part. So yeah, and a big thing is so some of it is involved in, for example, looking at campaign donation databases. So that would be man hours doing that type of research and compiling that, because as of right now, it's not in a type of database available in a type of database that makes getting information from the government like super easy to analyze. And then the other thing is that investigation involves like actually being grounded in the community and talking to sources and trying to get the full story. And so that takes a lot of time, and that's why you see one-dimensional, I think, stories sometimes in the media that really only give you the facts and don't really go deeper into the gray area. And Matter News's parent company is Gray Matter Media. That's just kind of the umbrella organization, because we do have a documentary film house called Gray Matter Films as well.
Okay.
And
have you guys put anything out with Gray Matter
So we have shot the majority of a documentary that we're applying for some grants to be able to really edit it into something good. It's about the kind of schism within the LGBTQ plus community here in Columbus that was not caused, but catalyzed during the Pride Parade.
Schism and catalyzed are... Thank you. Those are really good. I like those quite a bit. Schism.
Sometimes really good words especially come out when you've thought about a subject for a while. In this documentary we've been shooting for close to a year now.
Can you share what the schism
was?
Yes.
Yeah, sure, of course. So the Pride Parade 2 years ago in Columbus, some protesters did a silent protest in the middle of the Pride Parade for, I think the aim was 1 minute. And from what I understand from bystanders that I know, they said that the parade was kind of just moving around them for the most part. It wasn't really disrupting a whole lot, but they were standing in the middle, and the police... I've seen video of the incident. Really came up and, in my opinion, brutalized them. It was a pretty extreme response to a silent protest. Yeah, it was in response to, and forgive me because I forget on the timeline which death it was, but it was one of the high-profile deaths of a Black person by a police officer in the country. It wasn't Freddie Gray. I can't remember off the top of my head, but. It was for that, and basically the protesters really wanted the LGBTQ and like Pride community in Columbus to back them up, that it was inappropriate for police to break up a silent protest during a Pride parade where they see that the cause that they were promoting was one that's intersectional to LGBTQ and other communities who have been
so equality and just
and Stonewall Columbus is named for the Stonewall riots where the police used to bust into gay clubs and things like that. So they believe that they were acting really in the spirit of the LGBT community, but the schism, as I would characterize it, is between activists and people of color who don't feel necessarily that their cause is duly promoted by the white and higher income parts of that community. So I think it's kind of an intersection of socioeconomics and race and how all of that kind of plays out in society.
The institution of it all. We are choosing right now to support LGBTQ, LGBTQ, right? I said that right.
LGBTQ is what I say. There's a lot of different terms you can use,
So right now we're supporting them. We don't have time to support you right now. Get out of the way, because we only have enough attention for one group at a time kind of situation.
I think too that like nonprofits and a lot of organizations, they're funded by other organizations or other people who might not want them to take a political stance on something, especially that involves the police or different intersections that, like you were saying, this isn't about specifically LGBTQ. And so I think that the Stonewall, decided to testify in a way that was really sort of against the protesters, because they were charged with a bunch of charges like assault against the police officers and things like that. And so they were all facing jail time and different penalties.
Do you remember how many people it was?
It was 4.
Okay.
So if you look up the Black Pride 4, you'll find
that's what they're going
articles
under?
even in national magazines
Kinda
about
like
it.
The Memphis 6, but
Yeah, the Black Pride 4 is typically how they're referred to. And so...
And they've gotten national publication?
Yes.
That's interesting.
So it's gotten a lot of attention nationally, especially within those circles. And because this is not just happening in Columbus, this is playing out across the country, that there's kind of this schism that's being addressed and that's coming out when there's different incidences.
How do you feel about that? So, like, and something I have a problem with, like, big news is what I guess I'm gonna call it, is they'll do that. They'll wait and they'll have a story, or they'll find a story from 6, 7, 8 months ago, and they have a tendency, and then they'll bring it up again and make it act like it's new news. Like not Terry Green, but damn, do you remember that guy? He tracked that kid around and then he shot the kid as they were wrestling for the gun. He had a hood on. Draymond Green.
I'm not sure.
Well, I don't know. So, like,
because there's been multiple incidences
a lot lately. Yeah, there's been a lot lately, which is unfortunate. But, like, they'll wait to pick up a publication, and not to just say they do that in that community or in those instances, but, like, why do you think they will hold something back just to kind of support the news stories now? Or do you think they don't hear about them? I guess you don't know because you're not, like, you have never worked in like major journalism, but, like,
I think a lot of times because a lot of the outlets that report on those things, they are outlets that are dependent on ad dollars, and so they're going to report basically the information and at a timing that's going to be increasing their views. Right. It's not about, what is going to benefit the community most is not what they're thinking.
The goal is let's show something hot. Right. That way, like, okay, our most ad dollars come in at 9:30, right, so let's have what kills you at 10. Right, exactly. Like, this is in your kitchen that might kill you at 10. Wait to see. Right. And then once you do see it, it's not a real story. Right. But it was those 30 minutes. It was that ad break before that was really the driver. And I think we, as Matter News, really addressed that because we choose specific issues, and we aren't the ones who choose. We're not making decisions in the newsroom about what we cover. We are actually going out into the community. So we choose specific issues, right, that are going to be determined by a community-wide poll, meetings with community leaders, talking about what is mattering most to people in Columbus. Things we need to talk about. And that's how we're going to choose the issues we cover. So right now, we're specifically and exclusively covering the development of the city. Okay. That wasn't chosen in the way we will choose the rest of the issues because we didn't have funding or manpower to conduct a citywide poll. But it is an issue that's vitally important to Columbus because of our impending population boom. Yeah. That's going to double or triple our population within the coming decades. That's going to mean widespread need for preparing for those changes. And how the city might do that. Yes. Have you found, can you share some of the information you have found about how the city's going to prepare for? Yeah. I guess, so what we'll be doing is we'll be creating, and we've already started at matternews.org and our social media to investigate what is going on with development. And we have pieces that range from really getting an idea of what is the problem look like, and that's really the phase that we're in right now. And then later we'll be having pieces that build into what do solutions look like, what are people doing, and we really want to get into the gray and messy areas of development and what it means for Columbus. So not just headline news. You want to actually figure it. You want to at least see the problem from
Right.
as many angles as possible.
We're going to try to cover occasionally things as they're happening, especially major things that are happening at City Hall that have to do with development. But generally speaking, we're working on longer term things.
Yeah.
We're looking at we're going to be looking at campaign donations by developers and other entities that might be involved in development, and understanding, is there a correlation between that, and especially with the way that our city council and various entities are set up. It's very easily kind of corrupted by outside influences. So we're going to be really doing pieces that dive in deep on those facets of things, rather than skimming the surface level. This thing just happened and we haven't even really had time to digest it, but we're going to go ahead and put a piece out on it because it's part of the 24-hour news cycle. That's not what our model is.
No, you want to do the John Oliver 15-minute
that
hard piece.
But all different kinds of things. So yeah, we want to do
written,
the hard
just,
piece.
You want to do the deep dive, not
For
just
sure.
the skim.
So we even have a podcast series, and we're working with also a local radio station that might air it to
Ooh.
a large amount of their audience potentially. And
That's awesome.
it's going to be looking at development, probably particularly in Wineland Park, and how carryouts and other businesses are sometimes forced out of gentrifying areas.
Yeah.
And
like right down there.
Mm-hmm.
That one was forced out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're looking at one very close to here, so it might be the one you're talking about. But we haven't secured interviews with them yet. But that's what we're looking at, kind of in the lens of also what happened in Cincinnati with Over the Rhine. It was a very similar thing that they saw there. So we'll be doing some podcast episodes that kind of dive into displacement of certain businesses in gentrifying areas. Redlining, we actually are going to have at least a small piece on, and eventually a bigger piece on redlining, because that's definitely part of.
It's similar. I mean, it's not the same. You're right, I guess, but it's goes along the fact of people being forced out, whether it be business or actual people.
For sure, yeah. It's basically the drawing up of different neighborhoods in desirable areas, and just coming up with creative and sly ways of forcing certain
rent,
people out,
making parking more of a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at all of that kind of stuff. And then we do have some pieces, and there's an editorial by me on the site too that talks about why we're covering the issue of development. And one of the things that I found really interesting before we even found in Matter News, when I was just looking at making a documentary, is I got a hold of a document that had been obtained by some community organizers who were working on this issue, and they had requested this report from the city, and so it was an internal document that is now public, and it was a study that the city hired a couple of companies to help them evaluate what are our development goals and are we meeting them. And so they looked through city kind of initiatives like Columbus 2020 and things like that, and the companies came up with 6 goals that the city agreed to, and they were a downtown powerhouse, a regional economic engine, revitalize neighborhoods, and a job center. And then they had equitable development, so that benefits everybody, and sustainable development toward the future. And they basically had then the companies rate them on how are we doing based on the information and data we have and things like that. And the companies concluded that they were meeting their goals of a downtown powerhouse, regional economic engine, job center, but that they were not meeting their goals of making equitable and sustainable growth, basically, and revitalizing neighborhoods. They had very few, if any, policies really aligned with those goals.
Right.
So to me, that really told the story of why we see an imbalance and why we see high income, properties going up everywhere, but not an equal focus on low income properties.
Yeah. It's really kind of black and white right now. As if you go into like Franklinton versus the Short North, or you go into I guess probably Wineland Park or any of those other neighborhoods, it's a drastic difference.
Franklinton's a really interesting example to me, at Short North as well, just because it's so well known. And it really, the Short North developed slowly over a couple of decades.
In the 80s, it was don't come down here.
Right.
I literally, my parents were on. I had my parents on, and they lived down here in the 80s. And unless you were getting drugs or a prostitute, there was no reason to come down here.
Mm-hmm. And we actually, one of our first mini documentaries that'll be coming out soon, it follows Flower Child and the residents behind it at their location as it was on High Street. And they were all displaced by a company buying that building. And we talked to them a lot about how the neighborhood had changed so much. And one of the residents...
Because they had been there for ever?
Yes. And it was actually the housing above and behind Flower Child was HUD housing. That's the... Housing and Urban Development Department for the federal government funded housing for low income and individuals with disabilities. And Shep is one of the characters in that mini documentary, and he lived behind there, and he was, oh my gosh, his last name's Shepherd, but he is such a beautiful person. And we did some interviews with him because he was being displaced from that apartment he had for over 20 years. It was affordable for him. It was accessible for his wheelchair because it was on the first floor, and he loved being down. I went to Dempsey's Cafe, or not Dempsey's Cafe. I went to somewhere in the Short North. I'll come up with the name in a second. With him, Press Grill, and he knew everybody we saw along the way and in Press Grill, and he unfortunately couldn't find housing that was affordable anywhere really. So and really definitely nowhere near the city. So he ended up having to move in with his mom for the first time in 30 years in Dublin.
Which is out of like one, moving in with your parents sucks.
Right.
And then two, to be displaced from, everybody. That's a lot. That's your community. That's your friends. That's your family.
He had been here since the times you were talking about where it was kind of like, don't go down there. And now he's been there for 20 years and he's just, has nowhere else to go. And it also, I think from what I understand, there was recently a public forum with the city, and they were talking about some of the biggest issues that they're looking at with housing right now, and that people with disabilities really have a lack of housing, affordable housing in Columbus.
And when you have disabilities, you have to live close to things. So the best place to live is in a downtown hub because you can get to places a little faster.
That's
and
a really
easier.
good point. Yeah.
But if there's not, if you can't get down here, like you just are, your options drastically decrease.
Exactly.
And your options are already very limited as it is. So it's kind of just, it's a shit stick to get dealt. Yeah.
For sure.
You've put up several pieces on your Instagram, and I like reading them. But then you make them your stories, so they disappear, which makes it hard to go back to them to research for an interview, such as this. But
I've been meaning to put more highlights on my Instagram.
Yeah,
too.
That'd be really helpful. Yeah,
I'll do that. Okay,
I appreciate it. They're all archived, by the way, too, so you can just pull them up.
Right. Yeah, I have some highlights. They're just not updated.
You did one piece about. And it was one that I contacted you on. It was about the voting for city council is done through not a poll, but done through like a closed-looped circuit almost.
So this is happening right now as we speak, actually.
See, this is why, this is happening right now as we speak is very cool. Like, I really appreciate that kind of like this is happening in the city, and you're telling me, and it's just great because like I was watching the news this morning at Jack and Benny's. It was 2 shot and dead. It was something, and then some bullshit about the weather, and I just don't know what's going on otherwise. Yeah, and it's sad. And as soon as you see 2 shot and dead, you're like, I'm turning this off.
Yeah, and
I don't need this in my life right now.
I kind of used to have a negative view of like, oh, people just don't care what's happening. But then
they just don't know.
I started realizing when I would post things that people I would have never expected would like message me and be like, wow, that's wild. Like, I want to know more about that. That's really interesting. Thank you for posting. And I started realizing like people actually really are hungry for information. And so if I'm going to spend as much time as I do, trying to help people understand, I might as well do it kind of on a bigger scale. And I don't remember what your question might have been before that.
Oh, the closed loop city council that's happening right now.
So what's going on with city council? And I think in a piece pretty soon we're going to try to tackle this in some way and in some really digestible way, because it's a pretty easy concept to understand in the first place, and it's been one of the things that people have been most interested in. It's been this way for a long time, but just I would honestly credit the increase in consciousness around it to a local campaign called Yes We Can. They are a political campaign, but they really started educating and uplifting the groups that were already working on kind of campaigns to get people aware of what's up with city council. And so the major things to know about the way city council is set up: that one, we are the largest city in the U.S. without campaign spending limits. And that actually, there's a big fight going on over that right now, because the city is proposing spending limits, but they're proposing higher spending limits than most cities
right.
our size.
Because to go from none to some, you have to have, it's a weird.
It's better, but it's still
great.
Really high. And so it's kind of the illusion of reform, or like really not super meaningful reform,
right.
Which is kind of a trend that you'll see in a second when I talk about what's been going on with the rest of it. So a couple of years ago, there was a campaign, and a lot of people will remember because it was, I think, during a big election that we voted on it as a city. If you were here voting in actual Columbus. And basically Columbus is the largest city in the United States that does not have city council people represent a specific part of the city. So most cities have wards, as they call them, and the city council people are elected to represent specific wards.
Yeah.
City council campaigns are extremely expensive to run in this city because you have to win the votes of the entire city. You're not trying to win the votes of a specific ward that
get everything. Okay.
Right. And so you have to have a lot of money to run campaigns.
That's probably why there's no limit.
And exactly. And also, you pretty much can't win without a lot of name recognition, because most people are just kind of voting on, have I heard that name? Do I trust that name? Is it something I'm familiar with?
Also, sorry to interrupt, but it creates a really high barrier of entry.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Because then
that's what I'm getting
at.
If
I could run for my ward,
mm-hmm.
that's okay. I got to go shake the hand and kiss the baby
right.
of everybody in my ward,
right.
and I can do that. But if I don't have millions of dollars.
Exactly.
Right.
And so the other thing is, so really you can't win. You have no chance of winning unless you are with the mainstream Democrat or Republican Party, who will throw their resources behind you. And Columbus City Council is 100% Democrat. I think Columbus is certainly a majority blue city, but it's definitely purple to some extent. And our city council is 100% Democrat, and that's because most of our city council members have never been initially elected in the first place. They were appointed. And so about 32 out of the last 36 council people were actually elected the first time they were put in office. Most of them were initially appointed because, as is happening right now, what happens is someone on city council runs for a even more prestigious office like treasurer or, city attorney, things like that, even state offices. Yeah. And so when they win in that election to go to a higher office, their seat becomes open. And instead of giving that seat to the next vote getter in the election, city council appoints their own member to replace them. So that's how we end up with 100% Democrat city council.
Right, because nobody's going to... Why bring somebody from the other team on?
Right.
It seems to be working fine.
Mm-hmm. And then once you run your campaign for re-election, you have that name recognition, you have the party backing, you're a shoo-in, and no challengers can really ever replace.
And it gets exactly like a closed loop thing. You just can't get in.
Right.
Which is, I like that you want it to be purple because you need the balance.
Mm-hmm.
Do you generally, you don't have to share if you don't want to, do you generally rock on the liberal side of things?
I think, and this is a big thing with doing the news that I've struggled with, is like, how do I not turn off people who might have a different...
Yeah, because if you say you're a Democrat, then, maybe my dad
Right.
as an example,
Right.
just stops listening.
Right.
But that's, I mean, he wouldn't, but
Right,
you know
right,
what I'm
right.
saying.
Yeah. And I have, my dad is a bit Republican. And so, yeah, I don't want to turn off people who, because that's a big thing is I want to speak above the pitch of partisan bullshit. And, but the problem is that kind of perception matters and whether people will even tune into you. So I really struggled with that before I started this foray into things. Is I would like kind of like go on and on to friends about how am I going to make sure that this is like not seen as a liberal outlet, for example, because I don't think it should be. And I think as long as you're transparent, that is going to be a huge thing. And then we're going to let our content our content's going to speak, because we're going to be showing, like you were getting at, all sides of things and not just showing only our side, trying to shape a particular worldview, but rather do empathetic reporting that really gets to the heart of giving all sides a voice and kind of exposing the depth involved in things. And so what we've noticed is, you would think as kind of like this indie outlet that no one's heard of, when we approach developers to get an interview with them about Flower Child and the people behind there being displaced, I'm expecting that these developers are not going to want to talk to us or give us the time of day. They're extremely accommodating. We get there, they're extremely open and honest with us in their interview. They give us a decent amount of time for that interview, and afterward they really say that they appreciate that we were asking questions to try to really understand their side of something that, for example, for one of our mini documentaries coming up about a contested project at Second in the High Street area, all they've gotten is the local news, because I've been at those hearings, showing up to the hearing, airing a couple, a minute from testimony, and then getting a few sound bites from the developers and the residents afterward. Whereas we sat with the developers and the residents and we did whole interviews with them, some with the residents in their front yards as they were doing yard work in the summer. And we really got to understand, what does this issue look like from their perspective, and why are we seeing an impasse in that particular situation. There's literally a gridlock where people couldn't come together with the developers and with the city. No one could come to an agreeable solution, and that I think we're going to see more of that gridlock if we can't get to the heart of what's really like going on in these situations and larger trends in Columbus where we're seeing this kind of gridlock.
Damn, that was very good. A logistical question that I have, since you brought it up, was, you walk up to somebody in their front yard and you're like, "Hi, my name's Cassie, I'm with Matter News. Can I interview you about the current dilemma going on in your neighborhood while you rake your leaves or pick your weeds?" And is that how you generally go about it?
I would hate to do that. Oh my gosh. And yeah, I will say to some extent, like,
how do you get the interview?
Getting
of a
into journalism,
person?
Like, it was kind of scary, because you do definitely have to do some of that. Absolutely. And that sucks. It's just kind of what it is. But actually, to a large extent, it's kind of just making those connections and being genuine. So when I first, it was before Matter News, but when I started doing the documentary, a friend of mine mentioned that they heard Flower Child was closing, which they weren't closing. They were just moving, but that was the rumor I heard. So I just went in there one day and kind of asked, as I was shopping around, about what was going on with them. And they were just, really interested to tell their story. Even once I explained that I was a journalist, they were like, okay, and they were like, yeah, we'll sit down and talk about it. So people are really, I think, hungry to tell their stories. And the way that the people who were in their yard came about was, I was actually walking to do an interview with Shep, and he was like, here, I know these people over here. They're, there's a development thing happening with them. He, was a source for the story that I was covering about him, but he was also connecting me to other people in the neighborhood. And because we're spending time with, and we even plan after, and we've done this already to some extent, to really open up our reporters to the community. We had a reader comment on a story of ours on social media, the gentrification explainer that my reporter Riss did, and Riss had a coffee, offer to get coffee with her to discuss it more. And it was a really interesting, meetup where they got to talk about the subject more. The woman had worked in certain systems where she'd seen things. And so we really are grounded in the community, in that our team Entertainment Matter News comes from all different fields and works in the private, public, and even government sectors. Right now, at least, we're definitely working on raising funds through. We're going to be doing a campaign for monthly donors. We're writing grant applications. We just needed to get some content out there to be able to attract people so they can see because
what you guys are doing.
Right, because what the model we're creating is a little bit different than what exists, and I think it's hard to really ask people to get on board with something if they can't have a tangible example. And so we can say a lot of people, when I explain our model, say, oh, like Vice or Vox. So, those are definitely aren't perfect examples of what we're doing, but the local Vice or Vox, we're covering things in kind of the new age ways.
You're saying Vox or Fox?
Vox with a V.
Yeah, what's Vox News?
Vox? Oh my gosh. So do you have Netflix?
I do.
Check out Explained.
Oh, I've seen that.
Yes, that's Vox.
Okay.
So they are kind of like Vice. But they're a little bit, I would say, to me, they kind of have more of a politics vibe to them. Like a lot of their works tends to be less lifestyle and more news oriented, but they have a little bit of everything too.
I was a long time Vice fan. Like I've been, but they kind of become a shit rag to me.
And that's why I like to say, like, not a perfect model, but it's what comes to mind for people. But I think
it's kind of underground.
Right, exactly. Or it was at least until kind of, and I know that it has its issues and who owns it, I think, and things like that. And so that's another thing that we just really want to be local, especially, and be, grounded in the community that we're covering.
You have no desire to report on Cincinnati or DC or New York.
No, I think, in the future we could look at replicating our model in other cities or, creating a model that could be replicated in other cities.
Or hopefully just somebody sees you guys and then they're like, well, shit, I need to do that here.
Right. And so whether it inspires people to kind of adopt the model or whether we actually, snowball into a larger company that is working in multiple areas. I know that actually one of our team members was living here in Columbus at the time, but now is back living at home. And he is from, I'm going to blank on the country's name for a second, but he is back where he's from. Yeah, he's from a different country. I'll come up with it in a second. Nigeria. Sorry, I was blanking on the name for a second. He's from Nigeria, and he wants to export the model even to places like Nigeria. And then around the country, I know that a lot of our network, extends to other places that might be crazy at least to see, people.
To see like a underground news thing in a country where it might be a little more risky to do it.
Right. And we really, one of the phrases we've kind of been using, but we're playing around. It's not like an official phrase of ours quite yet, but we used it for some promo as like join the team that's revolutionizing the local news. And I think it is appropriate in that we're trying to kind of, and I played around with the word like evolutionizing the local news, because really we're trying to evolve the local news into its next form, which is getting away from print-based publications, the nightly news, TV news as we know it, and really evolving, taking the way that, I think that news just hasn't evolved with the rest of media, that it just needs to kind of adopt these new mediums and get creative and get experiential. Even we want to do events, especially being grounded in the community. Events are going to be a big thing for us, and really creating community around our media and around our news to make sure that it really reflects, because the thing that is an issue for me with media is I feel like it doesn't accurately reflect us back to ourselves. So we're seeing kind of like a distorted version of our communities and ourselves reflected in the news, because it isn't about us. It's about advertising dollars and, not having enough money for investigations or staff and things like that.
Or people who care about that. Right. You know what I mean? If I'm, for some reason, Grandview Cafe got the news lady to come from like the one that's stationed in Grandview. I think it's like Channel 4 News. She'd come all the time. She doesn't seem to really care about. She's doing it for a different reason. Right. I'm not saying her reason isn't just. Right. Like being an anchor. Right. Is something. You know what I mean? But I think being like a journalist is a different thing. For sure. And now that those two jobs have kind of almost seemingly, overlapped due to the fact that nobody really needs the 15-minute, 20-minute story anymore. Right. They need 24 hours, 365. We're going to just say whatever we can say to keep the ball going,
Right.
to keep the money.
And
the
I
ads
think
going.
it's interesting because technology is almost like rendering a lot of those models obsolete anyway, because
useless.
the 24-hour news cycle doesn't matter to a generation that doesn't have cable. And
and who has they have so many outlets
Right.
now that it's not just like, oh, I need to hear about the news.
Right.
No, if something happens complex,
Right.
or we'll demonstrate it before. Or
Right. Twitter.
Have you seen Jerry News?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yep.
great.
Yep.
It is just headline.
Yep.
But it's perfect.
Right.
Because it's just, this happened, and they know before
Right.
they're on it.
Right.
They're just on the ball. Pretty
It's
sweet.
wild.
Yeah,
it's
cool.
wild. There's a lot of room for, I think, evolutionizing the local news model.
Yeah.
But yeah, we want to do it with creative things, digital things, and we're primarily a digital publication that will be mostly on our website, social media, YouTube, things like that. But like I said, we really want to be grounded in the community events and really, associated with brands that we think are dope, like Presco Labs, for example, and like all of these different people in the city who are just doing really cool things are people we're going to continue to, work with, and especially once we have funding, because we are definitely going to become a fully sustainable model, and we have ideas for businesses that could help us sustain and things like that. So down the road, we look forward to hiring all of the great companies that we know of and startups that are going to be, I think, prospering by then anyway.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You have a certain amount of time, right?
I don't have a
Certain amount of time? We're almost at an hour. I have a couple questions that are kind of more like rapid fire questions.
Sure.
By the way, and I hate to say this because I'm 21 episodes in, but I prepared the most for you with questions.
Yeah?
Yeah, I really did, because I've had a lot of questions already rattling in my brain.
Oh my gosh.
So
that's awesome.
And the last comments I got on the last one is you're winging it.
Yeah.
And on the episode I just posted today, I was definitely winging it with my friend Christina, but this has been great.
Yeah.
What are your news sources that you look to for local, first off? Like, where do you find some of this information?
Mm-hmm. So interestingly, a lot of the information I get on local news comes from a digest that the county commissioner that I work for, their office, sends out a little digest of articles about like all different subjects, and they kind of break it down by county, local, state, national. And I really, they actually cover a lot of really good things in there. So I use that as a major way that I get all the news.
Source.
Yeah. And then Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, definitely to some extent, different people that I follow who follow these types of issues are posting things. I would say Facebook is still a big place that a lot of people post that stuff. Twitter, too, I just get overwhelmed by Twitter.
Yeah.
And then, let's see.
Who is somebody on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter in particular
that I follow? There's so many. None like really stick out over others, because they're all people who not a lot of them are actually like journalists themselves necessarily. It's just people I know that follow various issues, because a lot of people kind of right, and they have their particular issues. So some of them kind of tend to post in that lane, but others just post kind of like more generally. But I think that locally, like the Dispatch sometimes has really good pieces. Alive has great pieces a lot of the time. So there's outlets doing good work for sure. And like, you can learn certain things about little things going around town from Columbus Underground that you might not hear otherwise. But
they're a good event
for
kind
sure.
of space.
To some extent, yeah. I run a little bit of an events Instagram as well, just because it seems like
it's called the Move 614.
The Move 614, yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, a couple of
It's
friends
fun.
kind of actually are running it for the most part now, just because I don't really have the bandwidth, but we really just felt like people are constantly hitting me up after I go to some, party or rap show or something. They're like, what was that? That looked lit. And I'm like, I posted the flyer about it 2 days before the show. You just got to pay attention to my story. Well, so I'm all about, making things easy on people. Yeah. And also I have a lot of friends friends who throw events, who are local artists and who are trying to get people out to stuff. And then people, like I said, who are like, what is this shit going on? So there needs to be some sort of connection there. That's kind of a disconnect right now. And so I'm trying to think where I came from that I got on this tangent. So I make sure I wrap it up and not go on a bigger tangent.
You came from the fact that there are some good publications still in Columbus that you get your information from, but none of them specifically. You take from a lot.
Right.
You don't just take from one source, because then you just be regurgitating that one source.
Right.
So you need as many different outlets as you can.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's why I feel like it's really difficult, because and you can't really expect one outlet to do all of those things.
Which is unfortunate about major news again.
Absolutely.
Is that I am forced to only do John Oliver.
Right.
And then some guys or a woman is only forced to do Fox.
Right.
And then another person's forced to do,
and because
CNN.
Our wages are so depressed and we have so much student debt, I think like we have less time than any generation like recently to like be seeking out the curation of our own news. So I also have a business idea for the future on curation of news and kind of being able to get more news in one place. And I think that that's kind of the future, is different streaming platforms and specialized ones is a big thing that I've heard is going to be a future trend that makes a lot of sense to me.
Specialized streaming?
So streaming platforms for specialized things. So like one example, which I would say is like more niche than what I'm even thinking, that I heard in an article, was like horror film streaming. Like you'd have a horror film streaming app or service that you subscribe to if you're a big fan of that genre.
$3,
something like that.
Unlimited, right?
Yeah. So I have an idea for like a $10 subscription, a month kind of news platform, and you'd have to get
kind of like the Times is doing now. You have to pay to get the whole article.
Right. But instead of just making it one platform, you would pull from multiple platforms. Yeah. The big, problem with that would be getting especially some of the bigger, more traditional outlets to buy into something like that. But if you made the app good enough, people were into it because you are drawing from different sources and all that. But I just think we also need to expand what we consider the local news, because one thing that we're really trying to do, like I said, is go multimedia with podcasts, mini documentaries, articles, explainers, animations. We even want to do shit with virtual reality at some point.
Cool.
What would it be like to be evicted from somewhere, go through that process in Columbus, because Columbus has almost as many evictions as like New York City, and
really
we have way less population.
Our eviction rate is almost as high as New York City.
If you Google Columbus eviction rate, you'll come up with like a ton of articles from the last year. Our eviction rate is extremely, extremely high. One of the reasons that they think that might be is because landlords don't have to show up to court and neither do a representative. They can just send an affidavit, like a paper affidavit in, and they don't have to actually be there. So like tenants,
it's a lot easier. It also is a lot easier than if you don't have to put a face to the name. It's just like,
or if it's like
North Realty, probably is.
Some of them are owned, like a lot of these evictions are the same company, so they'd have to be showing up to court all day sometimes with these things. So like they can just. Have you guys?
Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
Have you guys investigated why you think the eviction rate is so high?
So we haven't yet, but there are the Columbus Dispatch, I think did like a little bit of a look into it. I don't know how much like true investigative work they did, but their conclusion was that was like one of the primary reasons.
Is that like North Step can own half the fucking city? I keep swearing so much. I don't know why.
It's okay. I swear a lot too.
Yeah, it's just sometimes you're in the mood.
Yeah. Maybe it's my swearing vibes.
Well, it's also just like it's frustrating a little bit that like the eviction rate here is higher, is just as high as in New York City, and the population is probably less than a quarter.
Yeah.
And, there's the city council that gets appointed and just kind of gets you mad because it just is like, why? Yeah. Why is that just, it doesn't make sense. And like, it just is because North Step Realty or name another one owns 30, 50 buildings with all student housing. So it's like, we're just going to evict you, and since it's inconvenient for us to have to prove why,
Right.
we're going to make a law and it's just going to work.
Well, and I think there's ripple effects too. Like, we have a big shortage of labor in Columbus, supposedly, where like there's, you know, employers actually needing people to work, but we then again also have a bunch of people that need work, and there's a disconnect because I think a lot of people, which I see working for a government agency with our clients, are they can't keep a job because they don't have steady transportation, because we don't really have a robust transportation system in the city, and rents are pushing people further outside and away from jobs. And then we also have unstable housing conditions where you can be evicted, where it's very expensive. And so there isn't a whole lot, I don't think, being done for like stability. And I don't think that there's a lot of news and different media that's really taking a look at like why we're seeing these trends. And that's a big thing that I really believe in.
And they're nationwide too. They're not just in Columbus.
Right. They're nationwide, but like I think localizing examples really bring the issue alive. And so I think it's, okay to hear about how that plays out in a place in Arizona. But if you're hearing about how it's playing out in the neighborhood, you know, down the street from you, that's going to hit a lot closer to home, right, and help bring that issue alive for you and make you care on a more visceral level. So,
and it's kind of the theory where it's like, if you show a person a picture of one starving child, their empathy for that starving child is very high, and they feel like they can help and they'll donate.
Right.
But if you show somebody 5, they're less inclined to donate. And then if you show them the whole village of starving people, they're not going to donate because I can't help a whole village,
right,
but I can help one person.
Exactly.
So if you localize and make the issue connect, you probably have a better shot of making an impact.
Right. And I think especially since the last presidential election, I've seen a frustration boiling over of people who are more ignited than ever to do something, but less enabled than ever to do something, or less sure of ever of how to like make an impact. I think a lot of entrepreneurs, you know, in certain creative businesses and nonprofits do, but the average person, I think, is a little less clear on what they can do. And it really starts with just becoming more aware. And, you know, to me, I think a huge thing and why I want to cover development is when I bought a house a year and a half ago, not far from here, I joined my neighborhood society and even got in the executive board because I really wanted to make sure that I was involved in my community. And it's been a really interesting experience because I've seen how development decisions go down at the neighborhood level and how little input neighborhoods actually have in power. They really have sometimes. And a lot of the reason is simply because the processes and government agencies and different things that govern them aren't covered by the news. There's not a light on them. People don't understand how they work. There's not a lot of publicity surrounding the goings on. So it's just accepted.
How many people are on your board for your neighborhood?
So basically it's whoever will volunteer to take a specific position, be the treasurer. I was the membership chair, you know, different things like that. So there's about 10 of us that are on the executive board. And then depending on the meeting and what hot topics are going on, what the weather's like outside, we might have anywhere from like 10 to 25 other people show up from the neighborhood.
And how many people are in the neighborhood total?
The neighborhood's pretty small. It's Harrison West. It's
okay.
In between kind of Victorian Village, Campus, Grandview, and Short North. So it's a pretty small area.
But there's probably at least 100, 200.
So,
do you know how many people?
I don't know exactly, but probably, in the hundreds there. And so we're pretty active from what I understand, as far as like a lot of neighborhoods have a pretty active communities, but some in the way that I would say like Short North is run is very different from my
yours
neighborhood,
could be
for
run,
example.
Right?
Yeah.
So like I live in Clintonville, and I don't know anything about anything about it. You know what I mean? I just don't. And I think that one of the issues is that probably since it's just who would show up to the meeting to vote on behalf of Clinton.
Right.
I don't know the meeting was even going on.
For sure.
Let alone know what the, you know what I mean? And I think that also kind of like just gives power to, oh, I just live in Columbus. Like I don't even think of myself as a Clintonville.
Right.
You like to say I'm from that area, Harrison West, right? Is like, that's my neighborhood.
Right.
But more so, it's like I would almost just think like, oh, you live in the Short North,
right?
Like you live close to the Short North,
right?
So it's just interesting that we're divided, but we don't even know we're divided,
right?
Which gives them a little bit more power
Right.
probably over us.
Yeah, and I'd say young people, I don't know that we're as involved with certain community organizations as like past generations. That used to be, I think, more of like a given that you would be involved in certain things. So
No, it was almost expected. Like baby boomers almost expect, if you're not, it's like a state of, it's like a thing. Like, oh, I'm on this board. Oh,
like
I'm
on the
this board.
Rotary Club or on like whatever. And and
I made sure everybody in my neighborhood had the same mailbox.
And I think that people in our generation have lost trust and hope for some of those types of organizations because they have traditionally kind of been run by, people that were able to get to the top of those organizations and whatnot. And so I think that people in our generation are like, I'm going to focus on being an entrepreneur. I'm going to focus on X, Y, and Z. And I do think sometimes like you have to make decisions and just focus on whatever. But I think less people in our generation think, well, hey, if I show up to a community meeting, I might actually see that there's a role for me to play in my neighborhood and that I can have like an impact on things around me, like on a more direct level. Because I think, and this isn't a point I started making a couple minutes ago and I just didn't circle back around to, but I think a lot of people are just like, hungry forever than ever to do something. And like at the very basic level, like I see that a lot of people feel like they just need a little more information on how things are set up, what's going on, because a lot of people are kind of afraid to engage because they feel like they don't know enough or they haven't been involved enough before. And I know that feeling because that's been me in like years and years ago. But there's just not a lot in place, even if someone says, hey, I want to learn a ton about like what's going on and then go out there and get involved, but I want to like learn a little bit first. There really isn't a whole lot out there, I think, that can help you understand what's going on locally. So we're trying to do that.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you for trying to do that. Really. No, I really appreciate what you guys are doing.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate it.
I think it's really cool. Like it's very underground, ragtag.
Yeah,
like
it is right now. We're like
badass.
Yeah.
It's like your underground news.
Yeah.
Like I feel like you should meet in a basement with cookies and bad coffee.
We literally did that, but in my dining room.
With like pamphlets.
In my dining room. Yeah.
That's awesome.
For the first like 6 or we only had to do that for a few, like 3 to 4 months. We would meet at my dining room table, and then my co-founder got she was renting a space anyway, and so we just upgraded to a different part of town, a bigger office. So I mean, it's a small office, but we have like 4 desks in there. Yeah, we have 4 desks in there, including an edit bay, and a little couch, and it's at Kova Co-work at Bottoms Up in Franklinton. So if it's a cute little cafe there with coffee and tea and different things if anyone wants to come by and say what's up. We have a really like crazy colored door, so that's how you know it's our office. Yeah, with our matter colors. That's awesome. Kind of like abstract, but
it's very badass. Yeah. No, I was jealous. I was like, as soon as you had that, I was like, fuck me, we need to get some color in here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but y'all's office is the best.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Do you have anything else you'd like to plug? I'm actually going to put all of your stuff in the YouTube bio, or in the YouTube thing. Yeah. And then I'm also going to probably, I'm going to plug it. I'm going to plug the resources. Dope. Because you're a resource.
Yeah, for sure.
And
yeah.
Like, I haven't had any, no offense to anybody else, but y'all don't got resources.
Yeah.
So there you go.
No, I definitely can help with resources. And my Instagram, which I think is just the best place to start, is at Cassie Young. CASSI.
You post a lot of little
614
things that you write.
Yeah. On my story especially, I post a lot of things. And so Cassie Young 614, and then Matter News is at Matter News _ on Twitter and Instagram, and we're also on Facebook. And that's about it. I have some other projects coming up. A festival I'm going to be throwing early in the summer this year. So no, it's a different festival. We'll be hopefully partnering with them a bit, but so it's a little too early to really share anything, but it's going to be multimedia. It's going to be music in all different mediums of art, and I'm really excited about it.
Well, maybe I'll have you on again.
Yeah.
Like it's just me. So I'll have you on again and you can talk about that.
Yeah, you can talk to me and my couple founders maybe because or maybe badass. One of them because they're super dope too.
I'd love that. Yeah. Let's have both of you on.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Would be dope.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed
it. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Woo.
I'm not always right. I'm only trying to be nice with my unsolicited advice. Unsolicited advice.